Donald Trump won his second term in office partly on a promise of ending all wars. But whatever happened to that promise? Now it feels like he is instead pushing the Middle East and the world closer towards dangerous and uncharted waters. In an interview with NBC on Sunday, Trump vowed he would bomb Iran if the country didn't agree to renewing a deal to curb its nuclear program. In response, an advisor to Iran's leader publicly announced on television that nuclear weapons were now the only thing that could protect Iran from America. Yesterday, Trump threatened the Houthis in Yemen with escalating his airstrikes on the capital Sana'a, which have already killed dozens over the last 2 weeks. That was in response to their interception of cargo vessels in the Red Sea. And of course, there's Gaza. Back in January, Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, bragged about how easy it was for him to get a ceasefire across the line, something that his predecessor couldn't pull off. Now, he's become one of the architects of its catastrophic failure, having abandoned his own three-part deal in favor of Netanyahu's renewed attempt to take out Hamas, reigniting the horrors of genocide with no end in sight. There's a phrase Trump loves to use over and over, and his team have picked it up as well: peace through strength. It's a phrase he borrowed from Ronald Reagan, who in turn borrowed it from the Romans. But what does peace actually mean for Trump? To tell us more, we're joined by Middle East Eye's editor-in-chief, David Hearst. David, welcome to the show.
Well, it's a great honor to be here.
Now, let's begin with Iran. The last 2 days have been quite chaotic. There's a lot that's being said. There's a lot of promises that are being thrown around. What do you make of the situation?
The likelihood of Iran and Trump, with this administration, resolving their differences through dialogue, which is what the JCPOA was all about, are next to nil. I think I covered some parts of the talks in Vienna between the new, quite hawkish Iranian administration and Biden. And one of the things that was absolutely clear as a result of Trump pulling out of the JCPOA was that Iran needed guarantees that if they signed any more deals with the US, they had to have compliance. And they had to have guarantees of compliance, especially they were talking about through the financial system. Now, could you imagine signing a deal with Trump and thinking that he would stick to it after he's torn up one deal after another? And Steve Witkoff's his Middle East envoy in Gaza tears up his own deals and says, "Oh, by the way, there's a new deal which you have to accept," and that's in the space of 2 months. What is the likelihood of Iran trusting Trump enough to do a deal with him on the nuclear stance? So that means that both sides are preparing militarily. Now, the last time round that there was a serious attempt, that was in Trump's first administration. Trump backed off from attacking Iran and killed Qasem Soleimani, who was the Iranian proconsul in the area. That's all he did. This time round, the whole logic of Steve Witkoff's interview with Tucker Carlson was, we've got to go after Iran next. We will not tolerate a North Korea in the Gulf. But attacking Iran is not going to be a walk in the park. So the calculation is how much of Israel's braggadocio and its overselling of its military capabilities will Trump actually believe? Because when Israel attacked Iran quite recently, they said they'd taken out Iran's air defenses. In fact, what actually happened was that the attack aircraft stopped when they were lit up by the Iranian air defenses, and they released their weapons then, right? Which is a very, very different thing to what they would have to do if they were to go after hardened nuclear facilities all the way around Iran. And how many times do they have to attack Iran? And what would Iran do in response? And to what extent would Iran then feel, or where would Iran feel, this is an existential threat, we'll throw everything. And throwing everything at everyone is the Third Gulf War, and involves hitting Aramco again and hitting all the Gulf states. In fact, they've already warned the Gulf that anyone who allows the US to use their airfields, it would be considered a legitimate target. And it's a really significant thing was said by Ali Laranjani, who, as you know, is a moderate advisor to the Supreme Leader. He said, basically, if you want to ensure that Iran has a nuclear bomb, then attack it, because the pressure of public opinion will build up until we have to develop a nuclear bomb. So these are very, very big questions to answer, and I'm not sure Trump has got any of the answers.
And of course, I'm sure Iran has been seeing the conversation around Russia and its war in Ukraine, and specifically how heightened the sensitivities are around Putin's own nuclear arsenal, and seeing, well, Europe can't really push him too far because he has the nuclear option. And so now, what if we had the nuclear option? Would the US be treating us different to the way that they are now?
That has to be the logic that things are going in. But I don't think it's the logic that Iran intends. This is an insurance policy, but it is an absolutely logical one, considering just how belligerent Israel and Trump are at the moment. If you look at the situation with all of its neighbours, it's tearing up the Camp David agreement in Egypt by threatening Egypt's military in Sinai. It's hardening the border with Jordan. That was the other country to recognise it. It is engaged in increasingly tense standoff with Turkey over Syria, and Turkey is now taking over one of the main Syrian air bases in the north, partly to deter Israeli attacks on Syria. It's still bombing Lebanon. I mean, just think of the list. If you just put this all up in a list, all of this has to, and you have to crush Hamas, and you have to crush Hezbollah. All of this has to be, and the Houthis. And all of this list has to be achieved in order to establish Israel as the regional military hegemon, which is, and get, of course, the Gulf to pay for it, which is exactly what Witkoff said, is the outcome of peace and stability.
Now,
so
actually, speaking
peace
of
through strength is the piece of the graveyard.
I want to pick up on that, but I wanted to, because you mentioned that interview between Steve Witkoff and Tucker Carlson, I wanted to play you a clip from that in which he talks specifically about Iran, but not in the tone that maybe we expect or we have seen over the last 2 days. So let's have a listen to what he had to say last month.
I think he wants to deal with Iran with respect. He wants to build trust with them if it's possible. And that's his directive to his administration, and hopefully that will be met positively by the Iranians. And I'm certainly hopeful for it. I think anything can be solved with dialogue, by clearing up misconception and miscommunication and disconnects between people. I believe that, by the way. And yet, and the president is a president who doesn't want to go to war. And he'll use military action to stop a war. That's when he actually wants to use military action. In this particular case, hopefully it won't be necessary. Hopefully we can do it at the negotiating table.
And this, I think, is the key crux of what this peace through strength.
The key words there were, hopefully it won't be necessary.
Yeah.
Which is an implicit threat.
And that Trump is willing to use military force in order to extract peace.
Yes.
Which is peace through strength, which is also something that we heard a lot under the Biden administration, which is de-escalation through escalation.
Yeah.
Does it feel to you like much has changed over the last year?
Well, it's changed in intensity. Just look at what's going on in Gaza. Gaza has been under a vicious siege for I don't know how many days, for now over a month. No water, no food has been allowed in. The incoming ground offensive in Rafah is going to be really bloody. Medics are hit, as we've been reporting. It's reached an intensity which is has outplayed anything that we've seen in its viciousness and in its kill rate before that. That is Trump's peace through strength in action. Just look at what's going on in Gaza, and no one says anything. Right? And Israel is bombing Lebanon, and it's mucking around everywhere. This peace through strength formula, the idea that we actually have to have a war to stop a war, is very dangerous in the Middle East, because as we know, it's not in Trump's power to stop wars. He can start them, but he can't stop them. And that is the overbearing lesson of this century's wars under any American administration throughout the Middle East and in Afghanistan. They can start something, they can't stop it. And if Trump were cautious, he would have to really think about what he could achieve through military action in Iran. And all of Witkoff's soft words are a smokescreen for an extremely tough message underneath, which is, if you don't listen to us, if you don't agree with us, then we bomb you, which is exactly what they did with the Houthi. Now, does anyone really think, who actually knows the Houthi history or the history of Yemen, that bombing anyone in Yemen is going to stop anyone fighting? The Saudis couldn't do it. An international coalition, including the Qataris, couldn't do it for 7 years. And the Houthis ended up stronger. Now, at the moment, what they're doing is bombing Houthi targets, civilian targets, in an effort to decapitate a very well-seasoned and dug-in mountainous guerrilla force. And the answer is they'll have as much success on the Houthis as America had on the Taliban.
And this hasn't deterred Trump and his people from continuing to use the language of peace and dialogue and coming together and all of this stuff, as if this is in fact a policy that is continuing on regardless of what we are seeing happening on the ground. So like last week, the White House held an iftar where they had delegations from Saudi and the UAE and a bunch of Muslim American leaders. And Trump there reiterated the fact that, yes, we are rebuilding peace and we're expanding the Abraham Accords and we're bringing more countries on board. Something Steve Witkoff said as well, that there's a host of new countries that are going to be added to that list of normalizing with Israel. What is it? How do we read exactly what Trump is doing or intends to do in the Middle East? Is there a plan here, or is it just chaos?
No, I mean, I think there certainly is a plan, and the plan is to subdue the Middle East and install Israel as a regional hegemon and get the Gulf to pay for it. How he achieves this is another matter, how he gets to it, but that is the outcome. And I think the means to the end will be so bloody that they will never get to the end. I mean, I don't think they've crushed Hamas or Hezbollah. And yet already it's 50,000 lives, or possibly 3 times as much, if you believe the Lancet. So I don't think there is going to be an achievable peace. And if you look at it from the point of view of Israel's Arab neighbors, all the regimes around who also suffer from a lack of legitimacy must be very worried. Because on the one hand, their default position is to welcome the US president on his upcoming visit to Saudi, to the Emirates and to Qatar. But on the other hand, they are faced with their own people who say, you're spending trillions on this man Trump, and you can't even get a bottle of water into Gaza. And the feeling of anger in Arab hearts cannot be underestimated. It's being underestimated by the West and by Trump, but not by anyone who actually knows the region. And that anger will outlast any ceasefire, even if it materializes. So, and from Israel's point of view, Israel's also in a ferment, an interior ferment. I mean, moderate commentators in Haaretz said that Netanyahu broke the ceasefire to save his political skin. And does anyone seriously think that even if Netanyahu is toppled from his perch by illness or by politics, that his successor would change the course that Israel's on? Would, for instance, Naftali Bennett not bomb Iran or not bomb Hezbollah or not carry on Gaza? The answer is no. So we have to heavily caveat anything we say about the divisions within Israel that is shaking it apart. And there are big divisions. There are an increasing number of reservists who are not turning up for war duty. There are the hostage families. There are divisions about military service. There are bitter divisions within Israel. But there is an absolute plurality, an absolute majority of people who believe in saying things that were unthinkable a generation ago. There was a recent poll, 3%, only 3% of Jewish Israelis thought that ethnic cleansing was immoral. Now that's a very, very, they may have always thought it, but now it's open. There's no taboo. There's no taboo about talking about genocide quite openly of Palestinians in Israel. That's the backcloth against which decisions are taken. And there are no breaks in Israel because Netanyahu has now cleaned out Shin Bet. He's although he has problems with the replacement to Ronan Bar, and he's also cleaned out the army leadership. He has an army leadership in 2010, it was basically his top generals who said, no, you can't bomb Iran. Not because they love the Iranians, but because they didn't think it was practical, it was too much of a risk. Now no one says no, either to Trump or to Netanyahu. And they're the people running the show.
And finally, David, all of this came to a head in early February when Trump, hosting Netanyahu at the time, said, seemingly kind of pulled this rabbit out of a hat and said that he was going to take over Gaza himself and build this quote-unquote Riviera plan that pushed everybody into a frenzy of trying to attempt to talk him out of it and talk him down. You had a lot of Arab leaders scrambling to try and present him with an alternative, and eventually we came up with this $50 billion reconstruction strategy. What has the Arab leaders, when talking about them, are they in control at all of any of what is happening here right now, or are they simply trying to save face?
I don't think they're in control. I think Israel's reply to that Egyptian plan, which was sensible, even though involved in that plan is increasingly an Egyptian appears a plan to airlift Hamas out of Gaza, and I don't think that's practical. So there are other sides to that Egyptian plan that haven't been talked about as much. All of that is predicated on a ceasefire, but the ceasefire is not going to happen at the moment because I don't think there's anything for Hamas to accept. Hamas accepted the first Witkoff offer, which was 5 hostages, a number of prisoners in exchange for an understanding that they moved to stage 2. Israel now says that's off the table and is now going with the second Witkoff offer, which is half of the live hostages, half of the dead hostages, and 40 days peace. And that's it, 50 days. And that's it. No, we can resume the war afterwards. Now, there's nothing for Hamas to accept in that. So there isn't a ceasefire. If there isn't a ceasefire, there's no Egyptian proposal. So I think we go into a situation where of the reoccupation of Rafah and no holds barred strikes on Gaza itself. So I don't think we'll get to a situation where the Egyptian plan is enactable. We'll get into a situation where Israel will keep on an intermittent war and keep on, even if they restore some of the water or some of the food coming in. It will be water and food on Israel's terms to specific parts of Gaza, and they will continue attacking Hamas.
David Hearst, Editor-in-Chief of Middle East Eye, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And you can read a lot more of David's analysis on his weekly column at middleeasteye.org. Now, I mentioned earlier this iftar that was held at the White House in which Donald Trump hosted a bunch of Muslim Americans and Muslim delegates. Here's what he had to say about peace.
In Michigan, I met with so many leaders of faith And I said, what about your attitude here, your attitude there? All of the attitudes and all of the things I heard, they said, sir, all we want is peace. Right? Remember, Mr. Mayor? I said, but I understand you don't mind death. They said, no, sir, we want to live. We want to live, and we want to be happy, and we want to love everybody. And I actually, it was a very inspirational period of time for me. And I want to thank you also for introducing me to so many of your friends. It was absolutely incredible. Thank you very much. To our Muslim friends, I look forward to working with each of you to achieve a brighter and more hopeful future. And I think together we're going to do great. You're going to make strides like you've never made. You have somebody in the White House that loves you.